Also want to talk about what are termed the Otto binder reports that were published between 1965 and 1969. This was kind of a weekly column where people would send in the reports from all around the world. There were a lot of historical cases that were seen there. Otto Binder wrote the text, and then he had an artist put together these sketches. So I want to just review some of these sketches here because they do have a historical precedent here. October 12, 1796, on Columbus Day over 170 years ago, Canadian observers reported an astonishing fleet of airships, UFOs, with portholes and visible occupants sailing over the Bay of Fundy from the Pacific Stars and Stripes. So here you've got 1796. So this predates the Foo Fighters. This predates the June 24th, 1947 Kenneth Arnold sighting. This predates the December 17th, 1903 flight at Kitty Hawk, and this predates the 1897 mystery airship wave. 1796. Who is flying these craft in 1796 that are piloted and are intelligently controlled in 1796? Here's the full color running of what that looks like by Tom Bogan. So what we've done is we try to make these old obscure cases that were published 50 years ago. We want to make them come alive. July 1868, villagers in Compajo, Chile, were frightened by a giant armor-plated machine covered with steel scales whose twin searchlight eyes stabbed down brilliantly. So let's take a look at this here. So you've got this quote-unquote armor-plated machine. So if it's really armor-plated, made out of steel, we're looking at something that's 150 to 200 tons. So right off the bat, you're not talking lighter than aircraft here, if it was truly iron-plated. And then it had these searchlight eyes that came down. So that's the same beaming spotlights that we've heard on the 1897 mystery airship wave, but that predates it because it's 1868. So even before the mystery airship wave, we've got this thing flying around. Here's a full color rendering of what this might have looked like when it was flying over Chile back in 1868. September 4th, 1967. This is another case from the QFOS archives, 2457 West Peterson Avenue. Now, these two were brothers. They had a very, very close encounter with this craft. They were setting up stereo equipment on the top of their apartment complex when this thing flew literally 10 feet above their heads. That's what the report said. 10 feet above. So they got a very close sighting. Here's what it looked like as it was flying by. And I kind of reproduce what he said here. Quote, this craft was gliding on an oil pathway in the sky. It was not flying. It was gliding like an oil pathway in the sky. So these things, they do not fly, quote unquote, on the principles of the Bernoulli theory. They don't use aerodynamics for flight. They're using another propulsion system altogether. Here's his original sketch from the MUFON report, well, actually from the QFOS archive, dated April 14th, 1971. So the guy did a really good job describing what this looked like in his report. Very well done sketch as well. This is my AutoCAD rendering of what that looked like. So we'll move on to the Father Gill sighting, June 26, 1959, Papua New Guinea. This is the case where Father Gill and at least 24 natives saw a 35-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It looked like a two-tiered wedding cake. Lower diameter is 35 feet in diameter. The upper deck of this wedding cake was 20 feet in diameter. And Father Gill reported that there were 4 what are described as just men on the top of this craft. 2 were forward on the forward section of the craft. The other 2 were further back. They were harder to see, and they looked like they were setting up something or quote unquote repairing something. At this point, Father Gill, he actually raised his hand above his head and was waving to this guy on the top, and this, whatever this being was, he waved back. And in some cases where this case is described, it's called the wave back case. It's that famous. There are newspaper clippings all around the world. Later in 1974, Father Gill visited the home of Jalen Hynek. His son Paul Hynek was there, and they had dinner. And Father Gill laid out the entire case. He wasn't seeking fame or fortune, but He was very honest about it. And when Paul told me that he had dinner with the father who described the case, it made it that much more real. So we went ahead and did an enlargement here. You can see these beings setting up some type of equipment, and then the one in the foreground waving back. And then there was a light blue or white colored beam that shot off at a 45-degree angle on this craft itself. Now, I interviewed a gentleman who used to work at O'Hare Airport. This is what's called the Ozark Hangar location, Chicago O'Hare, April, May 9, 2001. Now, this is before the 2006 famous O'Hare sighting. There were at least 3 other witnesses that saw this, so there were 4 eyewitnesses. What they saw early in the morning is a dish-shaped craft that flew right by this Ozark hangar. It was early in the morning. It had rained the night before, so the tarmac was still wet. But he described this craft that had kind of a bubble canopy up front. There were 12 elongated window sections. There was kind of a circular porthole on top. And then on the aft of this craft, which was circular, it looks more cigar in this view, but it was actually circular. He said that there were these octopus tentacles that were moving around like they were alive. And then there was a 12-inch highly polished ball at the end of these tentacles that were moving. Now, this is from the actual eyewitness. Here's his original sketch at O'Hare Airport. And you can see these quote-unquote antennas or octopus tentacles sticking out of the back here. Now, we've since updated the drawing. This is an updated drawing here. Here you can see these antennas. And then there was a small protrusion at the bottom back of this craft as well. Now, this thing flew over this hangar. It flew right by an active runway, and then within 15 seconds of passing an active runway, there was this low-frequency roaring noise, and that was a 747 on takeoff roll. So within 15 seconds, there could have been a mid-air collision, killing maybe 300 to 400 people, but this thing flew by just in time. It missed the 747, but could have been a mid-air collision. Okay, so I want to move on to March 23rd, 1966, Temple, Oklahoma. This is my favorite case of all the Blue Book cases. This is my absolute favorite case. So I want to point out, ladies and gentlemen, this is an actual U.S. government case. It's in the Blue Book files. It's actually there. You can look it on the microfilm. It's online as well, so it's an official case. This involves Eddie Laxton, who was an electronic technician at Shepherd Air Force Base. It's about 5:30 in the morning, so he's driving down the road, and he notices something blocking the road, kind of like perpendicular to the road. It looked like a bowling pin or like a juggler's pin, or even it was described as looking like a perch or a fish. Approximately 75 feet in length, there was about a 6-foot diameter bubble transparent canopy that looked like it came from a B-26. It was a kind of a brushed aluminum color. It had these 4 beaming spotlights that were very polished, and they were looking forward. On the upper deck of this craft, there was a stinger or spire that came back that terminated in a ball. It looks identical to the electrical trolley cars that used to operate in San Francisco. That's what this spire looked like. Now, at the bottom of this craft, there was an air stair hatch, and then there was what he described as like a 6'2" man. He was not an alien, he was a man. He was wearing 2-piece green fatigues. He had a baseball bat with the bill turned up. He was flashing a flashlight on the bottom of this craft like he was inspecting something. Just aft of this door, there was another one of these lighted portholes that was divided into 4 equal pie segments. There was flight controls that were too small to be effective for actual aerodynamic flying. But just to the aft of this lighted porthole, there was the designation written in black letters vertically downward, TL4768, written on the side of the craft. To this day, I do not know what that designation is. I don't know anyone who does. It could be an Atomic Energy Commission sort of a designation. We don't know. We'll go ahead and move on here. This is his original sketch. So this is Eddie Laxton's original sketch. Very rough, very crude. If you look at the dimensions out in front here, he says that it's 8 feet tall and 75 feet long. Well, if you look at the dimensions here, ladies and gentlemen, this thing is grossly out of scale. If this thing is actually 75 feet in length, it should go off the page. It should be much longer. So I spent 2 days cleaning up the drawing, and this is the final rendering of what I came up with here. You can see the length of this thing is now correct. It's got the correct thickness. We've got the air stair door in place. Now, Eddie Laxon said that he was so close to this quote-unquote pilot or man that he could see that on his shoulder it had these chevrons, or maybe some type of ranking chevrons on his sleeve. And he also said that if he saw this gentleman or whoever he was, pilot, later that afternoon in town, he could recognize him because he was that close. Here is the original Project Blue Book index card. So just showing you that it is a Project Blue Book case. Now you can see it says here 40-second duration. It was southeast departure, March 23rd, 1966. Interestingly, truck drivers also saw this as well. So it's more than just Eddie Laxton. Here's a newspaper clipping, the Daily Oklahoman, March 1st, 1971. They kind of interviewed Eddie Laxton here. And you can see the top of this newspaper clipping heading is Object Sighting Now Rude, because he regretted ever even talking about this. And that's something that's reported again and again, where these witnesses who are interviewed and they actually come forward after the interview, they're so harassed, they regret ever even talking about it. That actually lends credibility to the case.